Welcome to the club. Let's go right on into it. Here we are in the white cube. This place is bright. You can't see the edges, but we do see there's an on and off switch and a mode switch. And what is this? We need to smack that. All right, now we got some music. This is good, but maybe we need to turn this thing on. Boom. There we go. Check it out. And now we're in fade mode. It starts on fade mode by default. You can switch to flash mode. So if you're photosensitive, please note we're about to switch to flash mode. In flash mode, we get this kind of bouncy number, bouncy colors. Very cool. Classic dance floor vibes. We can turn it back up to fade mode. And if you want, you can even pause it by turning it off. And then you're stuck on a certain color scheme. And your music can be turned off and on by just slapping that. You might have seen that in our boombox tutorial, levers from our lever tutorial. Let's learn how this is done. So the first thing you're gonna note is that our floor on the roof actually changes color to let the person spawning in know what's going on. You'll note that this is our control object for our lever. It's the same one from the lever video. And so we're using that as well here. We're not running the color control off of that, but we do tie into it, which you'll see in a second. Every single object runs this script on it. You'll notice that we have to connect to a control object. We also connect to a remote trigger, and that would take a long time. There's 81 of these squares just on the floor alone. So what do? Well, we just link it up in the first square, and then we duplicate that square. Once you get to 3, you can then triple duplicate to get to 9, and then you do that to get to 27, and then you do that 3 times to get to 81. It's very simple. It took me less than 2 minutes, and that is how we create the floor. Then once you've created a floor, you can take one of those objects and stretch it to become your walls and your ceiling. And that keeps all of your script connected. Under our variables, you'll see we have our control. That's that control object I just pointed out a minute ago. We then have 0 and 1. These represent the lowest and maximum color value that we can get to. So 0 means it can go all the way to black, and 0.8 means it can go all the way to like 80% brightness. Now we have glow running on all of these. And because we have glow running, it actually amplifies the number. That's why we're using 0.8, and we don't mind it being black. The next you'll see is our delay minimum. This is when we're flashing, what is the fastest rate it could possibly go, which is 0.25. So it can go as fast as 1/4 of a second, but it also can take as long as 2 seconds. So it chooses a random number between there. We have 2 variables to define what's going on. We have our on switch. So this tells us whether or not the colors are changing. And then we have game mode, which defines whether or not we're in fade mode or whether we're in flash mode. After that, you're going to see a bunch of number variables. Current red, current green, and current blue defines what color we at currently. By setting it to default at 111, this means it starts at white because we're using RGB color scale. And then we have what is the next color we're going to. So in our script, we're going to set what color we want to go to. We then go from, at the very beginning, we start at white, and then we go to that color. And then we can, because we're starting on fade, we do this with a slowness of 20. And what 20 means is it divides it by 20 pieces, and it takes 2 seconds to get to that color. And the reason it takes 2 seconds is because our delay maximum is 2, and on fade mode we use delay max. So if you wanted this to be a slower fade, you'd set this to 3, and since this is running at 1/10 of a second, you'd set slowness to be 30. Technically we could do some math to get this number, and we probably should, so that way the delay max is that. But you could also do slowness in a different way, like making it go faster and then pause. So say you set delay to be 4 seconds, you could set slowness to be 20 cycles, and then after 2 seconds it's gotten to that color, and then it waits 2 seconds before going to the next color. So that's why we're keeping these separate, is there's more options there. Our remote trigger is the on and off button switch, so we tie into that. And so let's take a look at our script. So the first thing you're going to see is we connect to that remote trigger. That's the on and off button. We connect to the trigger enter on local event on and off. And so if we scroll down to the on and off, under on and off, you'll notice we receive it with a player ID. This is because the trigger enter comes with a player ID, and if we don't add that using this plus button, define it as a player ID, and then I called it PLID, that's just a label. By doing that, we can now connect to a player enter event, but if we don't have a player ID connected to our event, we will not receive the event. So it's very important that you have that. Then we do two if statements. We check the Boolean. You remember that Boolean we were looking at that defines whether it's on or off. So it starts as false. So when the first one comes through, we say, is on true? No, it wasn't true. So is on false? Yes, it is. We then send event on to self with a 0.1 second delay. And under event on, you can see that we're setting that Boolean to be true. And by doing that, now we have turned on our dance floor. We do the exact opposite for off. So if it is on, it is on. We can see that the Boolean is true. We then send event off to self with a 0.1 second delay. Now you might be wondering, why don't we just run this set command underneath the if statement? Well, if you did that, what would happen is it would go if, then it would set it, and then it would run the next if statement immediately afterward. By adding this 0.1 second delay, we've separated them out. And the other thing here to note is we are separating both of these. We technically don't need to separate this second if statement, but by separating both of them, we can now use them in other areas. So if we ever wanted to send just on or just off, we can do that very easily. The next thing you're gonna know is we're connecting to control's grab start event. And you'll remember this is our control object. And from our lever video, you'll remember that the control object is a grabbable object that teleports to the handle of the lever. So this means when you grab the lever, we send event local event mode. Here you can see that local event mode is almost identical to local event on and off. It's also setting a Boolean. It's first checking that Boolean, then it's sending the event with a 0.1 second delay and changing it to the opposite. The next thing you're gonna note is we send event color change to self. And when color change is received, we set next red, next green, and next blue to be random numbers between 0 and 1. But remember, 0 and 1 are actually variables, and this allows us to change it without having to type in a bunch of numbers in here. And that is how we define this. So we use a random number with decimals between our variable 0 and our variable 1. Then we send event color change to self with the delay max. So we're only changing that color every 2 seconds. We see send event my event to self. What is my event? Well, this is the main action happening inside of our color change. And so when my event is received, we're first checking to see, is the thing on? If it's not on, we're not gonna do anything. In fact, the only thing we're gonna do if it's not on is we're going to send my event to self with a delay between minimum and maximum. So somewhere between a 1/4 second and 2 seconds, we're gonna resend my event. And we're gonna do that constantly forever until it's turned on. Once it's turned on, so you press the red button, we then check to see what game mode are we in. Are we in game mode fade or are we in game mode flash? If we're in game mode flash, you'll see that we color self with a random number between 0 and 1, 0 and 1, 0 and 1. So this is an RGB scale. And so we've got a new color variable under our operators tab. And if you scroll down, you'll find new color from RGB. When we put that in here, we can now get our RGB value. So remember, before we were using variables and we were setting them to be a random number with decimal between 0 and 1, the variables. Well, here we're doing it inside of the RGB. We don't have to set a variable for this because we're using it immediately. And we do that on self. So this sets it to a new color immediately. It doesn't even care about the setting of a color. In fact, the setting and color command is only applicable to our fade. So if we're in game mode fade, also known as Boolean true, we set current red to current red plus next red minus current red divided by slowness. What we're doing here is we're finding the difference between current red and next red. And so by taking this, we can figure out what is the difference between the color we want to get to and the color we're currently at. We then divide it by slowness, and we send this event with a 0.1 second delay. So remember, we were sending my event with a 0.25 to 2 second delay. Well, now we're sending it with a 1/10 of a second delay, which allows us to constantly update it. So we get 10 updates per second, which gives us 10 iterations per second of the color slightly changing. And it goes by a 20th every single time, getting closer and closer to the next red on our current red. And we do this for green, blue as well. And then immediately after setting those, we color with the new color, and we use that same RGB, except for we're using the variables current red, current green, and current blue, and we do that on self, and then we send my event, and we loop this over and over and over again until either the game mode is turned off or switch to flash. It's pretty simple, but just again to reiterate, what we're doing is we're taking the current color, next color, subtracting the current color, so that finds the difference between the two. We then divide it by slowness, and that is how we get how much we need to adjust our current color by, and we then set that on our current color. And we're doing that for red, green, and blue. So it's pretty cool. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. But thank you so much for checking this out, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye!